Genesis chapter 37 today is our text. To start off, we'll go to Genesis 42. And so, verse 5. Joseph had a dream. 17 years old, 11th son of 12 sons of his father's household. And when he told it to his brothers, they already hated him because he was the favorite. They hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. When we were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly," that's the title of the message today, "suddenly, my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves," I wouldn't recommend this if your family doesn't like you, for you to say this to them, but Joseph did. He says, "Suddenly my sheaf arose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered round mine and bowed down to it." And then we go into Joseph, where he will spend the next 13 years of his life as a prisoner and as a slave in Egypt because of his brother's hatred. And then he's elevated into Potiphar's house because he has a dream interpretation. And he becomes the solution for a famine that's taking place over the entire world. And then chapter 42, verse 3. Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob didn't send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for there was famine in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all of its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. This, dear friends, is God's word. Trey asked me this week, what are you preaching about, Pastor Tim? Trey's in the front row over here. Wave your hand, Trey. I said, "Why? What do you care? What do you want to know?" I don't ever like to really talk a lot about when I'm in preparation message. And he goes, I just want to know. And I go, "What do you want me to preach on?" And he goes, "Well, Moses." And I said, "Well, why?" Trey goes, "My name is Moses. And I don't know a lot about Moses." And I told him, I said, "Joseph is our story this week. And Joseph is a prequel to Moses. We'd be no Moses without Joseph." And so that's where we are today and in the Word of God. And just to kind of flip to where we are, one thing we've always done with my family is we've really been into the Olympics. Since I was a kid, back, way back a lifetime ago, we would watch the Olympics around together. And even now, as I have a grandson and he's 17 months old, one of the things that we tried to do with him when the Winter Olympics occurred last month was we'd get him in front of the TV. He'd watch the Americans do their thing and the skiing and the snowboard and all the skating. And we would go, "Caspian, USA, USA." We captured him after a couple of days where he would be watching something. He'd be going, "USA." Brainwashing him from a young age. I remember Bob Hayes in the 1968 Summer Olympics. I remember Mark Spitz winning 7 gold medals in swimming in 72. I remember the Miracle on Ice in 1980, our U.S. hockey team against the Russians. I remember, all kinds of Carl Lewis moments in 1984, Allison Felix, FloJo, Simone Biles, Michael Phelps. I just love the Olympics. And so this year was no different. And probably my favorite story out of 2022 was a 40-year-old snowboarder from Iron River, Michigan. This was Nick Baumgartner's 4th Winter Olympics to compete in. In 2010, he finished 20th. In 2014, he finished 10th. In 2018, he finished 4th, 1 spot out of the medal round. That's a bummer. He comes back this year in 2022, and on Thursday, February 10th, he competes in the snowboard cross, which is kind of like a BMX bicycle race, only on snow and on boards. And the next day, here's the headline from his newspaper: "Olympic dream dies. Nick Baumgartner, 40 years old, knocked out in the second round of snowboard cross." And I was watching it when it happened, and as soon as he finishes, and his failure is in front of the United States and all the world to see, NBC interviewed him. Pretty sad, right? I mean, he's looking at his family, they're interviewing him in the moment of his defeat. And the problem is there's one more snowboard cross event, a team event, where the U.S. male and U.S. female will compete together against other countries. But because he finished so low in his individual event, he's not going to be selected to be on that team. And so that was his last event. But 2 days later, on the morning of the team snowboard cross, it started snowing. And the U.S. snowboard officials decided to replace the other guy with Nick Baumgartner because he was a little larger, a little heavier, and he could ski a little faster, they thought, while it was snowing in the fresh powder. And he would ski with Lindsey Jacob Ellis, or snowboard with Lindsey Jacob Ellis, and they would win a gold medal for the United States. In 48 hours, his whole life flipped. And if you want to have some fun today, when you get home, get on YouTube and watch his interview with NBC after he wins the gold medal. Watch his interview with his family there and his celebration with his 13-year-old son. And that's really what I want to talk about today. Now, that's a natural, sporting moment in life, but there's principles there because the real turnarounds, the real suddenlies, which is the title of the message today, it comes in the context of the Word of God and the things that God wants to do in your life. See, because suddenly is a word that means quickly and unexpected. And it can be a really, really good thing, or it can be a not so good thing. I mean, when Joseph takes his royal, richly ornamented robe and goes out into the fields to check on his brothers, he's the father's favorite. The best way I can equate it is Joseph's dad give him the keys to a Lamborghini, and he goes out to his brothers who ride bicycles. And when he gets out there, his life is good. He's the favorite son. He's got wealth, he's got influence, he's got power. And suddenly, when his brothers go, here comes that dreamer, and they seize him and they throw him into a pit and they get ready to kill him, suddenly his life changes immediately and instantly. But today we want to focus on how God takes those devastating moments of our life and he turns them for his purpose, for his glory, and how quickly he can do that. Because our God is a God of the suddenly. In an instant, the hopelessness and the circumstances of your life can turn on a dime, and you are on a path to fulfill your hopes and dreams where minutes before you could see nothing in front of you. I mean, Joseph's dream 17. Teenagers, you get dreams at youth camp, you get dreams in Wednesday night youth service, and you think, and the way our culture is, we get a word from the Lord, it's kind of like our cell phone, right? I mean, I want to log on to the internet, do all it. If I have to wait more than 5 seconds, what's wrong with my phone? I mean, it does have to go to space and back first to get to you. And that's how we think God works. When he begins to deposit stuff into us, we think we can log on and we can connect to our fulfillment in a moment. But sometimes, like Joseph, it's 17 and then he's 30 and it's been 13 years and there's nothing. As a matter of fact, it's gotten worse. And he wakes up at 30 years old, he wakes up as a prisoner in a dungeon, and 6 hours later in the afternoon, he is the second most powerful man in the world. God can turn your situation on a dime. Years of suffering, disappointment, despair, suddenly there's breakthrough. I was telling the early service that, I don't know one of our guest speakers a few weeks ago referred to a book by H.B. Garlock, one of our missionaries to Africa 100 years ago in the 1920s, and the book was called Before We Kill and Eat You. And I'd read this book. I have it in my, I have it in my office, and back several times in the past. But I thought, I'm going to go back and reread it. And just going into Africa, we're just pioneering. I love that word pioneer that Pastor has been sharing with us. Being a proton to bring the gospel to a continent that has not received it, and all the dangers with that. And so he goes into Liberia in 1922, and immediately he gets a convert. Her name is J2. She's a young woman, but she has a 9-year-old daughter that has been kidnapped by one of the opposing warring tribes, and they're holding her, and she's gonna, at 9 years old, is gonna be married to one of the prince warriors of the village. I mean, and so she's weeping before the missionary. Can you do something? Can you rescue my daughter? I mean, he's a missionary. He doesn't have, weapons, those kind of things. They're there to bring the gospel to a continent. But finally, he decides, you know what, I'm going to go do this. So they get a traveling party. They leave their little missionary village, and they head on a 2-day journey to get to the village where the girl is being held. They get in the village, and they're trying to do all the barter, the trade, the dialogue to get her out, and the chief says no, and it begins to get intense. And so finally, H.B. Garlock, he says, you know what, I decided I'm going to do something. He picked up the little girl because she had come out, and he grabbed her, and he walked out of the village. Crazy. They travel, the warriors don't come after them. They get to another village and at the end of the night, and they settle in a hut to a friendly village, and all of a sudden at about midnight, the warriors from the other tribe that they had taken the girl from had followed them, and they storm into the village. And they're hollering, where's the missionary? Where's the missionary? We've come to kill him. We've come to kill him. They were wearing war paint. Each warrior had a knife and a spear. They made a mad rush toward him as he stepped outside of his hut. And I'll read some of it. The end was near. Henry had done everything in his power to save the little girl. He felt the weight of responsibility for the lives of the faithful members of his companions. Their lives were now in the Lord's hands. As the leader lunged at him with the sword drawn to cut off his neck, he closed his eyes, he fell on his knees, and cried out, Jesus, Jesus. Suddenly there was silence. Henry stood still for what seemed like hours. When he did open his eyes, he saw 20 warriors in front of him, paralyzed, unable to move. And he says this, like the soldiers struck with blindness by the king of Aram who were sent to capture the prophet Elisha, God had intervened. Suddenly, he had delivered them. Don't care what it looks like. I don't care how long it's looked that way. It might be something that happened just right now. It might be something that's happened for 10 years. God has the ability to step into your situation and go, you know what? I'm just going to change it all right now. I mean, that's how it was like for Joseph. I mean, nothing has changed. He's in the dungeon. He's, kind of in charge of it, but it's not that much fun to be in charge of a dungeon. How many of your life goals are to be in charge of a prison? Maybe there's somebody, I don't know. But Pharaoh had a dream. He had a dream of 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 skinny cows. And then he had a dream of 7 fat sheaves of grain being eaten by 7 skinny sheaves of grain. He's troubled by this dream, and when he wakes up in the morning, he says, I'm going to call my magicians, my wise men. I need to know what the interpretation of this dream is. And when he begins to share what he saw, his chief cupbearer goes, oh yeah, there's this guy, when I was in prison 2 years ago, because you were mad at me, Pharaoh, and the baker, and we had dreams, and it troubled us. We went to this guy, this Hebrew slave that was running the prison down there, and he interpreted our dreams correctly. The baker got killed. I got elevated back to my position, and I've kind of forgotten about him, but he can interpret your dream. Can I tell you this? What Joseph went through for 13 years was all orchestrated by God for this one moment in time. See, if he had never went to prison, if he had never went into Egypt as a slave, if he had never been hated by his brothers, if none of those things had happened to him, he would not have been in position when the famine was going to come to all of that part of the world to rescue Egypt and to rescue his family. God puts you in places that sometimes you don't understand and can't see into the future for a moment where he's going to deliver you instantly to bring you into your full destiny and your full calling. And I love Joseph. As Pharaoh goes, can you do this dream? He goes, I can't, but God can. The 7 cows and sheaves, fat ones, are 7 years of prosperity, economic prosperity. And the 7 skinny cows and the 7 skinny sheaves are 7 years of famine and devastation to the economy and the land. And then I like Joseph because in verse 33 of Genesis 41, he's not above self-promotion. Because he goes, let the Pharaoh, the king, look for somebody wise and discerning to be put in charge of all of this stuff so we can store up grain for the future. And then Pharaoh looks at him and he says, can we find anyone like this man with whom is the Spirit of God? And suddenly, restoration begins. Suddenly, everything that had been taken from him in his life is instantly turned around, and unexpectedly, he is in charge. Oh, you're not really that excited. Look, what can we learn from him today? In the next 20 minutes, what can we learn? The first thing suddenly did, it restored Joseph's freedom. Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God, chapter 41, verse 39, since God has made all things known to you, no one so discerning and wise as you, you shall be in charge of my palace. You shall be in charge of my people. They will submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. What Pharaoh is saying, I ain't even going to submit to your orders. Now, we love to romanticize the Bible, right? David, he killed Goliath. Moses took the people out of the promised land, through the Red Sea into the wilderness. Paul, the apostle, the shining light on the road to Damascus. Peter, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. But the reality of it is, when you're in the middle of their situations, it's not that romantic. And when you're in the dungeon, it's not that fun. You might be elevated to be the leader of the dungeon, but it's still not that much fun. But now he is free. He is an authority over the former slave owner, Potiphar. He's an authority over the prison warden, and he's an authority over all the people of Egypt, and even mostly over Pharaoh himself. God instantly can break the chains of your circumstances. I was talking about my friend Clark here in the front row this morning. He's been 10 years, was it last month, right? 10 years last month, instantly delivered from the bondage of alcohol. I asked him, I said, I did this, I said, what was your life like before the suddenly? He went, and then I said, what was your life like after? And he went, my friend Jay Dan, who runs Forgiven Felons, he grew up in church here. He grew up, in the Trinity Christian School. He grew up in the kids' church and the youth group and all the things that are there. Great parents who love the Lord, but he got into young adult age and he just went his own way. Alcoholism, and ultimately, he will tell the story of his hundreds of drunk driving times in his life. He was caught 5 times, and he would go to prison for 5 DUIs. And he said when he got to prison, he didn't get any better. He didn't change. His whole demeanor was like he just, who he was still angry at God. And he got so bad within his first year, he was put in solitary confinement. And when he's in solitary confinement, he tells the story that he's down there in the prison and he's remembering the worship of a Sunday morning service. He's remembering the teaching of his Bible school teachers. He's remembering the Bible quiz verses that he learned as a teenager. And it came flooding back, and he called on the Lord. He said, Lord, if you'll deliver me from this, I'll serve you. Instantly, he said, the desire for alcohol left him. Instantly. I don't know, I'm guessing that's 17, 18 years ago, and he's leading men out of bondage today because he had his suddenly moment. You can, whatever it is, the chains of your life, God can immediately break them off of you, whatever situation, whatever addiction, whatever thing is you're dealing with. In the book of Acts, chapter 12, Peter is put in prison. James, the brother of John, has just been executed by Herod. And it so pleased the leaders of Israel, of the religious leaders, that Herod goes, well, I'll just execute Peter too. I'll kill him. So it'll make them doubly happy. And he's in prison. He's the next apostle to be killed. Verse 6 tells us in Acts 12 that he was sleeping between two soldiers, intertwined, bound with chains. The soldiers are chained to him. And 16 other sentries stood guard at the entrance. And I like how Luke, the writer of Acts, he paints such a negative, grim picture of Peter's situation. 2 guards that are chained to him, 16 sentries, 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. James has just been killed. The trial is the next day. Peter is going to be dead by the next night. What's the church doing? They're praying. Do they believe that Peter can be delivered? No, they do not. I mean, they don't. I mean, we all know someone or something that they are so bound by something that you don't think there's any way on God's green earth that their situation can change. But suddenly with Peter, the angel of the Lord appears. The light shines in the cell. The angel slaps Peter in the side, says, get up. It's actually there. The angel hit Peter. Peter puts on sandals. Chains fall off. He puts on clothes. He put on a cloak. He follows the angel out of the prison. He thinks he's sleeping. He thinks he's having a vision or a dream. And all of a sudden he passes the first guard. They pass the second guard. They get to the gate of the city because the prison is outside the city. And they get to the gate of the city. The gates just open up. Before there was Aladdin saying, open sesame, Peter's walking with an angel and gates are magically opening before him. And he goes immediately to the house where the disciples and the apostles are praying for his deliverance. He knocks on the door. A teenage girl comes to the door. She's a servant named Rhoda. She hears his voice. And she's so excited that she doesn't even open the door. She leaves him outside. And she runs back into the church and to John. She runs back into James, Jesus' brother. She runs back into Matthew. And she says, Peter's at the door. Peter's at the door. He's been delivered. He's free. Verse 15 of Acts 12. Rhoda, you've lost your mind. You're crazy. Peter's in jail. He's guarded by 18 soldiers. Herod's going to kill him the next day. He can't be free. But he was. Suddenly, the enemy and all the forces of hell and all the strength of the chains you might be under, they're not strong enough to keep God from performing a suddenly on your behalf. You know, we purchased a kids camp, youth camp in Ukraine 3 years ago with our Lent offering. Well, that's what's coming on Easter, the Lent offering. We used some of that to pay for big projects. We spent $30,000 and purchased that land. 20 miles from there, there's a church that kind of runs and administers that camp. It's kind of in the Donbass area of Ukraine, in that realm. And in 2014, that church tells the story of how Russian soldiers came into their city. And they wanted the church because the church was on a hill, and it was an outpost for their military operations. And so they actually, in taking the church and taking land, they killed 2 or 3 pastors, and then many of the leaders of the church escaped, and they were hiding in the basement under the church, unknown to the Russian soldiers. And so as they're down there, they're praying for deliverance, they're praying for freedom, they're praying for something to happen. In that part of Ukraine, I mean, it was really, really terrifying, in that moment, much like it is today. And after about 2 weeks of their prayers, they wake up one morning and they get the news from outside that the 100 Russian soldiers that controlled the city and the outpost were just gone. They had left their equipment, they had left all their stuff. Just in the middle of the night, they just disappeared. And even today, if you walk into that city, there's a monument with all the Russian military equipment that they've built, and they have the burial plots for the pastors who died as a testimony to God's power, that in a minute, in a moment, God can deliver people from whatever they're going through. And I just believe that the church of Ukraine right now that is trying to serve and trying to go through all kinds of things that are happening in their nation, that God can perform suddenlies on their behalf over and over and over again. But I do think we need to be praying for them. Sometimes it doesn't require that much faith, because obviously the church didn't have that much faith with Peter, but their prayer still had impact and had power. Joseph's freedom was restored. And the second thing is suddenly restored. You'll like this one. It restored Joseph's fortune. Pharaoh took his signet ring off, took his ring off of power, and he put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen, put a gold chain around his neck. Genesis 41, 42, 43. He had him ride in a Lamborghini again as his second in command, and the people shouted before him, "Make way, make way. This is Joseph, this is Joseph." This is crazy because he's a Hebrew slave. I mean, instantly, he's a slave, he's a prisoner, he's a foreigner. He has no wealth, he has no possessions, nothing to his name. And now he's one of the most richest and powerful individuals in the world. I do not care what your financial situation looks like. The God of the suddenly has the power to change everything right now. When my wife Michelle was pregnant with our second pregnancy, we learned quickly that there were twins. So we named the twin boys, Joseph Daniel, Benjamin David. 6 months into the pregnancy, we found out, doing a routine sonogram, that one of the twins, Daniel, had died, and the risk for Michelle and our other son that was still alive in the womb was very high. And so there was a new medical treatment, a thing called a Tocos monitor. I don't even know what it did. It monitored contractions, and it was an experimental thing. And they said, "Oh, you need to do this, no problem, your insurance company will cover it." Well, it was like $2,500 a day. I mean, I think I made $30,000 that year, so that was not going to last very long on how many days. And so she was on that monitor for probably about 70 days. You can do the math in that. And as we would have the birth, and miraculously Michelle would be fine. Our son David would be completely whole and healthy, and it was just a miracle of the health. But then a couple of weeks after the birth and all that, we get the bill. "Oh, your insurance company is not covering that experimental treatment. You owe $150,000. I mean, are you kidding me? Do you know how much I make? If I don't eat or live anywhere for 5 years, maybe then I can pay it." You have the miracle, right? Michelle's alive, David's alive, the miracle. I'm complaining because, God, if you can do the physical thing, why can't you do the financial thing? Probably about 3 weeks later, we get this letter, or we get a phone call from the Tocos company. And they said, "You know what? We've seen your situation, we've looked at it, we're really upset with your insurance company, but we're going to waive your entire bill. You don't owe us anything." Look, student loan, tax issues, debt that you've gotten yourself into. I don't really know. I'm just telling you that in a moment when God wants to step in, he can change your fortunes in an instant. But he can't change them if you're spending all of your time going, "Oh, woe is me, oh, woe is me," and blaming others and God for your situation. I mean, it's throughout the Bible. I mean, they're over and over and over again. Elijah goes to the widow Zarephath, and he says, "Hey, I know you're really poor. You have one meal. You're going to eat it, and your family's going to die. Okay, but like any good spiritual leader, give me your last dollar." That's what he did. "You give it to me, and then you can go die." And she does. And instantly, her situation changed financially. For the famine, the entire famine, for the next couple of years, there was food in her house every single day. His successor, Elisha, runs a school of the prophets. One of the prophets dies. His widow, the prophet, wasn't a very good, financial guy. One of the widows of the prophet who died comes to Elisha and says, my husband has died. He's left with all this debt. And if I can't solve it, I'm going to have to sell my 2 young sons to pay the debts. Elisha goes, how much oil do you have? She goes, well, I got a little bit of oil. He goes, how many pots do you have? She goes, I don't have really any. She goes, well, go find some pots. She goes and finds pots from all her neighbors. He begins to take the oil. They begin to pour. It pours and pours and pours and pours and pours and pours and pours. Creative miracle idea from the prophet, the man of God, and she pays all of her debts, paying for the oil. And in the New Testament, Matthew 17, these are they're everywhere. The tax collectors and the religious leaders come to Jesus or come to Peter and they go, do you and Jesus pay your taxes? And Peter lies. Yes, we do. Oh no, we haven't. I love Peter. And he's not going to tell Jesus about his lies, but next time he walks into Jesus' presence, Jesus looks at him and goes, Peter? Peter? Yes, Jesus. And he asks him questions, and Peter knows that he gets caught lying, and he tells Peter, he says, you take your rod and reel, go out to the Sea of Galilee, throw your line into the water, you'll catch the first fish, you open up its mouth, there'll be a 2-drachma coin, you take that to the tax collectors, and you pay my tax and yours. Instantly. I went to Slotsky's last Sunday. I go to Slotsky's once or twice a week. Maybe once a week. 2 weeks ago, my medium original, my chips and my drink, $11.03. $11.03. Seems reasonable. I went to Slotsky's last Sunday. My medium original, my chips, my drink, $14.95. Inflation is killing me. I mean, everywhere I turn, everything I want to buy, want to purchase, is costing me more. And I'm going, God, this is, I'm your child of God. You've never seen the righteous forsaken, your seed begging for bread. Where's your provision? In 2 Kings chapter 6, inflation was really, really bad. Because the enemy army, like what's happening in Ukraine, had surrounded the capital city of Samaria. And they began to starve to death. Because no food could go out, no food could come in. No water could go out, no water could come in. It tells us in 2 Kings 6 that a donkey's head to eat cost 80 shekels of silver, 2 pounds of silver, which today in modern terms, $25 an ounce, $800 for a donkey head to eat. But that's for the wealthy. If you were poor and you wanted to eat, you had to eat dove's dung, D-U-N-G. Teenagers, you can Google what dung means. 4 ounces of dove's dung cost $50. And they're dying. And the man of God steps onto the scene and he says, hey, I've got a word. I've got a word about suddenly your financial fortune is going to change. Tomorrow, all prices are going to return to normal. Everything will cost what it cost back before this thing started. 2 Kings 7, verse 1. The people around, the economic advisors of the king and the president, they're like going, have you looked at our city? Have you looked outside the walls at the enemy army? Can you understand? And they said this, even if God opened up the windows of heaven, could this happen? Now, be careful when you doubt. I don't think I told this in the first service, but y'all seem way more mature. Because the guy who said that, Elisha looked at him and went, yeah, it's going to happen tomorrow at this time. But you're not going to see it because you're going to be dead. And he gets trampled by the people running out. And the next day, the sound of heaven happened at night. The enemy ran, they fled. They left all their stuff, their silver, their gold, their weapons, everything. And the next day, the Bible tells us that a pound of flour and a pound of barley sold for a normal price. Suddenly. I had a prophet tell me once, Tim, you're one God idea away from $1 million. You're one God idea away from God restoring your financial fortune. suddenly restored Joseph's freedom, suddenly restored his fortune, and then finally, suddenly restored his family. That's your cue, Gabe. I know you're coming already. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. Joseph's dream at 17, what was it? Was it to be rich? Was it to be powerful? Was it to be the second king, second in command of Egypt? No, that wasn't his dream. Most people think that his suddenly moment is when he was escalated from the prison to the palace, which it was a suddenly moment, a good moment. But that wasn't his dream. His dream was that the sun, the moon, the stars, his father, his mother, his brothers would one day come and bow down before him. And when he's elevated into Pharaoh's position, nothing changes as regards to that. He works for Pharaoh for 7 years. He's building the grain houses. He's storing up the grain. He gets a wife. They will have 2 sons. They have a family. He's living in his wealth. He's living in his authority. Life is better. The famine begins. And he begins the process of distribution of the food all over Egypt, all over the known world. He's 40 years old, 23 years since he's had his dream, and there's no dad. There's no younger brother. There's no older brothers in sight. Everything of that is a distant memory. I don't know if he remembered his dream. Can I just say something about Joseph that you need to hear? Joseph, he suffered well. He suffered well. His sister was raped when he was a boy. His mother died in childbirth, giving birth to his younger brother Joseph. His brothers throw him in pit and they try to kill him, and their only way, we'll change that. We'll sell him for $200 into slavery. They lied to his dad for 23 years, saying he was killed by wild animals. He suffered well. I'll tell you a story I didn't tell the first service because I have a little bit more time. You know the song, right? It Is Well With My Soul? Horatio Spafford, he wrote it. His daughter's drowned in the ocean. He gets out over the ship and the spot, and it's where he writes the poem, It Is Well. Actually, it's called Ode to the Villa de Havre, which is the name of the ship. And so he will go on, and he's good friends with D.L. Moody, who's a big revivalist in the 1800s. And D.L. Moody has a worship leader. Worship leader's name is Philip Bliss. And Philip Bliss gets this poem about the death of Spafford's daughters. And he changes the title of the Ode to the Villa de Havre, the ship name, to the It Is Well. And he writes the music to it. Writes the music. Philip Bliss, a great worship leader of that time. You can go back and look online. You see songbooks by Philip Bliss. And so he sings that song for the first time to a group of pastors in Chicago right around Thanksgiving of 1873, I think. And then Christmas happens, and he's going to go do another revival service in Chicago with D.L. Moody. And as they're nearing Chicago, they're in Ohio, about, I don't know, hour or so away from their destination. The trailway, the wooden trestle of the train, it's snowing really hard outside. It gives way and it collapses. And all the railroad cars that are on there, that Philip Bliss and his wife are on, they have their kids that were left back home with their family, it goes into the ravine. Just horrible, twisted. Well, I mean, there's kerosene lamps on the wooden railway cars, and the cars began to erupt in flames, and he crawls out a window. Crawls out a window, and he's like, survivor, and then you can see the things going up, but he can't find his wife. So he runs from car to car because now he's just wanting to know what car he went to. He finally finds her. He hears her. He crawls back into the window of the burning train. and she's pinned down by iron bars and iron works. He can't get her out. And so he just decides to stay. Snuggles up next to her, and they die together. And if you read different reports, there are a couple of reports where passengers that were survived heard someone singing, "It is well with my soul." So everything in life on this natural thing doesn't always work out in the moment or the season you expect. But if you're really going to have a suddenly moment, you're going to have to learn how to suffer well. Because when you're in Joseph's situation, you can't get bitter, you can't get lazy, you can't get angry against God. You've got to, because it says everywhere he went, into slavery, in prison. I mean, even in Pharaoh's house, he said the Lord was with him. Everything he touched, before there was Midas, there was Joseph. Everything he touched turned to gold. Because he knew how to suffer. And then one day, Genesis 43:6. He's been doing what he knows to do for 23 years. And suddenly, his brothers arrived to buy grain. They bowed down to him. They didn't recognize him, with their faces to the ground. He didn't stop there with the fulfillment of his dream. Because if I'm Joseph, okay, these guys tried to kill me, separate me from my dad and my brother, my loved ones from my lifetime. Psalms 105:18 tells us that when Joseph went into slavery, his neck was in irons and his feet were in shackles. And they bow down before me. So I'm going to step my foot on their head. You hurt me? God put me in this position? I'm going to hurt you. This is what you deserve. But man, he's not like that. He's willing to reconcile with his brothers. He's willing to forgive them. Doesn't mean he trusts them completely. That's why he does the whole little thing with the cup and Joseph's sack and all that kind of stuff. But he's willing to forgive them. And he's willing to let everything inside go. And because of that, this is his moment where he is completely free. I went skiing last week with a group of men, and teenagers or young adults. About 20 of us to Breckenridge, and I didn't know how I was going. And when I get there, there's somebody in our group that I have a relational issue with. And I'm asking myself, why is he here? The things he's done should disqualify him from any relationship with any of us. What's he doing here? Because he hurt me, but he's hurt his family and others way more than he hurt me. But I'm just ticked off, and I'm just going to spend my week avoiding him. When I don't know if you've ever been skiing, but you have to go up ski lifts and you have to wait in line, and when you get into the lines, you never really know with your group who actually you're going to get aligned up with. There's lifts that hold 6, there's lifts that hold 4, there's lifts that hold 2. Unlike our 4th time on a lift, or on one of those that holds 2, and he just skis up right beside me. I don't want to get on a lift with him for the next 20 minutes, just me and him on top of a mountain floating up into the air. I might push him off. But we reconcile. There was a breaking. And the blood covered. We'd wind up like 4 times we'd be on a lift together over the next 3 days. And we're whole. You're not going to have a suddenly moment if you don't let this go.